All right, you're listening in there to Trudeau making some of these comments there in French as Trudeau, the latest incumbent to be driven out by rising voter dissatisfaction worldwide, said it became clear to him that he cannot be the leader during the next elections due to internal battles. He said he planned to stay on as prime minister until a new leader of the Liberal Party is chosen. He said, quote, "I don't easily back down faced with a fight, especially in a very important one for our party and our country." All right, we want to continue here on this and bring into the conversation right now Wall Street Journal Canada correspondent Vipal Monga. Thank you so much for joining us, sir, here on Live Now from Fox to discuss the latest. What led to this decision, and are we surprised that Trudeau decided today, although being described himself as a fighter, to not fight for this role any longer?
I think the real surprise with Trudeau is that he lasted so long. His poll numbers have been mired in a huge slump for over a year. And there's been growing calls in his party for him to leave. So the fact that he lasted that long does, I think, support the idea that he's a fighter. He was willing to stick around for a while.
All right, yeah, almost a decade there as the prime minister. And of course, you heard their dissatisfaction from voters. Was it more internal pressure within the party or external pressure from other parties that potentially led to this?
Well, it was more an internal issue with the Liberal Party. He also lost the support of the left-leaning New Democratic Party, which had been propping up his minority government. But there's also a whole issue with, frankly, the whole country was kind of tired of Trudeau. There was a huge amount of Trudeau fatigue after almost a decade of him in power. So that was a real issue.
Yeah, that is a major issue as we're learning that statement. And of course, he says he's going to hang on there as prime minister until Parliament resumes back in March. What comes next for this role, and who may be the next prime minister of Canada?
So there will be, as he called it, a robust leadership contest. The front runners right now are Chrystia Freeland, who was his finance minister until she resigned earlier this month, and also last month, and Mark Carney, who used to be the Bank of Canada governor and the governor of the Bank of England. He hasn't officially thrown his hat in the ring, but a lot of people are expecting him to try to run.
All right, that makes sense a lot. And of course, that was the finance officer that stepped down. Of course, that will be an interesting one for them. And we talked about this no confidence vote, and people maybe here in the United States don't fully comprehend. Can you give us an understanding of how that works? What is the no confidence vote? How rare, how unusual is it?
So it's not that unusual. What is unusual is that you have a minority government. So they have a minority, they don't have a majority of the seats in the House of Commons, and they depend on the support of some of the other parties. Now, there are certain votes, like budgetary votes, which are considered confidence votes. If you lose them, basically the House is signaling that they don't have confidence in your government to lead, and at that point, the government falls. And there could be one as early as March 24th, or the last few weeks in March. If the Trudeau government or the Liberal government at that point loses that vote, that would initiate an election, which could happen in April.
All right, very good. That moves very, very fast, and it's kind of different. It's so very interesting to look at that in the context of what we see here in the United States. I want to ask you, because Trudeau has said Parliament has been, quote, entirely seized, call it paralyzed. How did that impact his role as prime minister and what ultimately his decision to resign?
Well, I mean, the Conservative government has been effectively filibustering over their issues with the foreign interference inquiry and their issues with the management style of the Trudeau government. But really, I think when it comes down to it, he'd been trying to hang on as long as he could, despite mounting opposition to him. His leaving right now, I think, is difficult because he wanted to at least stay on through June when he would have presided over the G7 meeting in Alberta. So I think him talking about the paralysis in the government, frankly, sounds a bit like making
all right, and of course you talk about this, and we look at this also in the context of a second term for Donald Trump. And of course, he also reacted, as he usually does, on social media, calling Canada the 51st state. Also, a lot of this pressure coming from that 25% tariff that he proposed on Canada. How much of an impact do you think this second term of Trump had on this decision for Trudeau?
I'm not sure that he left because of this decision or Trump. I think he probably would have preferred to stay on and try to fight. I think it is true when he calls himself a fighter. He really is a fighter. He would have loved to stay on to sort of take on Trump and probably would have thought it would have helped his electoral chances, but things moved against him more quickly than he expected.
Right, that also makes sense. And of course, let's talk about the next prime minister, because it's not Trudeau, and you mentioned that it not likely didn't have to do with the second term for Trump. What will the next prime minister have to do in terms of the interactions with Trump, interactions with the Trump in this second term?
Well, if the polls today end up being correct whenever the election is, the next prime minister is going to be Pierre Poilievre, who's a conservative, right-wing populist, very much in the mold of Trump light, if you want to think about it. And I think that any prime minister that comes in will have to contend with a much more protectionist um, Trump, and that causes lots of problems for Canada's economy, potentially. It really depends on exporting to the US. So they're going to have to do whatever they can to maintain their economic relationship with their biggest trading partner.
Yeah, and Trudeau also said that it was a balance there, describing economic growth, but also environmental protection. Do you think it may swing in the economic development growth with this next potential leader in the prime minister?
Well, definitely Poilievre wants to cut the carbon tax that Canada has instituted. He's a real supporter of the oil and gas industry. And frankly, that is one of the biggest economic drivers for Canada. So if Canada wants to pull itself out of the economic slump that it's in, it's going to really have to lean heavily on commodities like oil and gas. And Poilievre seems all in on that.
All right, very good. Thank you so much for some great understanding. A very interesting topic is Trudeau deciding to resign as party leader today. We'll see who comes next. Obviously, you pointed out several names there. We'll see what happens in Canada, especially with Trump's second term. A lot to discuss internationally. Vipal, thank you so much. I appreciate your time here on Live Now.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. All right, let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox. Great conversation there as nearly a decade as the Prime Minister of Canada comes to an end in the next several months, with that no confidence vote likely coming in March. And I want to put up just some of these posts here from different leaders in Canada as well, talking about Justin Trudeau claims he is a fighter. Why not exercise his legal right to call an election now and face me, because he is too weak and afraid. So the country now spirals out of control with a weak, lame duck prime minister, while Liberals each fight each other for power. That could be coming from the next prime minister of Canada. Also, other people within Canada posting here on social media talking about this. Below my statement on it: if you oppose callous conservative cuts, if you oppose the rich getting richer while everyone else falls further behind, stand with the NDP this time. That one coming in as well. And I believe we also have a statement here from the Liberal Party saying, our progress is all because of you, our volunteers, our supporters. Thank you, Team Trudeau. Let's